reading from the Gospel of Mark. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him as he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue named Jairus came, and when he saw him, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live." So he went with him, and a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and had come up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well." Immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw a commotion of people, weeping and wailing loudly. When he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Then he put them outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went into where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha kum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. At this they were overcome with amazement. He strictly ordered them that no one should know this and told them to give her something to eat.
Tell me your trouble. I'm not your answer, but I'm a listening ear. Reality has left you reeling. All facts and no feeling. No faith and all fear. I don't know why the good man will fall while the wicked one stands.
Why not? Yeah, the mic's already on. What about it? You want these? I'm going to pass out some crayons. Don't get excited. They're for the kids. Here you go. That should be enough for them. Here you go. Here you go. All right. We have kids' bulletins for when they're in here. And they're only going to be in here once a month. Unless, because of the nature of not having a lot of people, there's an emergency or something. But when our children are in here, we want them to engage and to somehow try to think about and learn how it is that we can all interact together in this kind of space and in this setting. This is way too close to me. Freaking out. There we go. So, there are 2 questions in there, young ones, that if you answer them based on the things I'm saying in the sermon and bring it to me, you can pick out of a treasure box that has things like sticky hands or candy or those things that unroll, like a party favor thing, stuff like that. So, think about it. Also, you can color those sheets if you want. And that's that. Couple of announcements. First of all, starting next week at 9:30 a.m., if you feel so led, able, and have the desire, at 9:30 a.m. at Bayshore Baptist, we will be starting a chapel series. And it will end around 10:15. Plenty of time to get back here for our 11 o'clock service. But we're going to be looking at the idea of justice as it is used in the narrative of the Bible, defining the word, understanding our role in organizing together to build a more just world. I will be teaching that, which is why I'm announcing it here. In case you don't get enough of me talking, you can get a little bit more. If you don't normally come to the class here at 10 o'clock, that might be something you're interested in. There is childcare. And it might be a cool way for some of us to meet some more Bayshore folks as well. Also related to things that Bayshore can offer you as a person, Wednesdays at 12:15, I know mostly people work or, have things they are dealing with their kids, but every Wednesday at 12:15, there's a prayer time. It's, we move through like a, structured, responsive, written out set of prayers with a small time for prayers of the people. And it's in the chapel. It's a nice time for like centering, reflection, and to kind of reset that week, right? So if you're ever thinking, man, it's the middle of the week, I'm going to take my lunch break anyway, I'd like to do some centering prayer, then you can join us down at Bayshore Baptist for that. Okay, let's get into this. That song was perfect. I didn't really like how I was going to introduce this, and I was like looking at it and crossing things out and not knowing how I was going to open up. And then when that song Flags was sung, it kind of hit me that it's a very powerful statement at the end. I know the last will be first. Do you know that? Can you really say that honestly? Can you sing that? I don't know that. I know that I can say that. I know that Jesus says. I know the Bible says that. I know these things mentally, right? But do I know it, like lived experience? Like I have the kind of certainty or certitude at least that is coming? I don't know. Did you watch the debate? Maybe you're like me and you thought, well, wrap it up. We're done. We're done as a people. We're doomed. Is there any kind of answer that we can carry with us or any kind of posture or way of being that we can carry with us that says, regardless of what 2 absolute morons say, we can build love, community, joy. Equity is the hard one, right? I know the last will be first. How is that possible? When everyone who is first right now is going to make darn sure that doesn't happen. I think you're here precisely because you're wondering, maybe if not that exact same thing, you're wondering something. You know that not everything in your life is figured out. You know you can still grow. You know there are steps for you to still take. If we didn't realize that about ourselves, then we would just never have to gather together to explore our faith, to explore questions around what it means to be human in our world, what it means to be good neighbors to each other. If we thought we had that figured out, we wouldn't need this space together. So hopefully you're here precisely to be, again, disrupted, a holy interruption, as we will see in a little bit, something that at least can keep that gap open for you, so you can keep asking the right questions and not let it close in and just fall into one side or another. Here's a fun exercise. Name something. You can say it out loud if you want, but think of something at least. Think of something that you disagree with God about. What's one thing you and God disagree on? For most of us, if we're honest, if we hold a conception of God, or if we were to, come up with something where God holds personal ideas, we might realize that they line up pretty closely to our own that we already hold. And that serves to illustrate to us that our conception of God is probably little more than just a perfected version of what our own opinions are, right? And that's difficult to break out of. That's a natural way of thinking. It's natural for us to project ourselves, the way of life we've come to live together, that's been given to us by our culture, onto God. To make those things self-evident, or to say that's just the way things are. It's the way the universe is. And it is because of this tendency that we as humans have that it is so crucial for us to be a part of a community that is intentional about, one, relating itself to others outside of its own community, and two, intentional about hearing the multitude of voices within. Remember our discussion from the book of Job? We don't know all the answers regarding the events that we experience in this life. And we miss something when we, like Job's friends, too quickly speak for God. Or put another way, assume that we know what is the obvious right thing. So we have to learn how to allow for the fact that we don't have everything figured out. But then that might leave us feeling despair or paralyzed, like we don't know how to move or act or make choices, right? It might be kind of easy to get to the place where we think, okay, fine, we don't have anything figured out. Well, then I'm just confused. Then I don't know what to do. You're right. The things I hear around me don't make any sense, but I am forced with a choice. I have to pick one or the other, don't I? Maybe you don't. Yes, anyway. This is where it is important, I think, that we interact with biblical texts. Because it is sitting with these texts that in our place of being unseated and disrupted and decentered, we are unseated, disrupted, and discentered, but not in some intangible, unexplainable way. We're not just disrupted for the sake of disrupting, but our life together is being formed into a particular place. We are being led down a particular path. We are being led into a world of rightness and justice, into God's kingdom. And so before us, we see displayed time and time again in the Bible a God who does, in fact, take sides. In a broken world, we see a God who is with those who feel pain most acutely. In a world of exploitation, we see a God who stands with those who are exploited. In a world of poverty, we see a God who stands with those who are impoverished. Some theologians call this the preferential option for the poor. In other words, God is more for the poor than the rich. Now, at first you might think, that's not right. God loves everybody the same. I know this. I've heard the songs. I've been in the Sunday school classes. I've read the books. And in some sense, of course, that's true. God is love. And so if you are by very nature love, then you would love all people and all things and everything, right? And yourself. But as we look at the flow of Scripture, we see God coming to the aid of the poor and the oppressed, while salvation, deliverance, rescue, right? These words that we've clung to for a long time that feel so safe and secure, the security, the safety, the rescue for the powerful means leaving behind their exploitation and making restitution, right? We think of Matthew, the tax collector, and Zacchaeus, right? Yes, come along, come join Jesus' movement, but you have to give back those things you stole from people. We are all invited into God's kingdom. Open arms, full grace. But what that means when we look at the stories in the Bible is that God is standing against those who oppose the common good and standing with those who are kept from goodness. And here maybe we can answer the question. Maybe if we have that little bit of space and disruption that maybe you didn't bring into the sermon, maybe this is where we could answer the question, one thing you disagree with God on. I think we disagree with God on this. I think we do. I think I do. We don't think the poor should have a preferential place. It's likely we believe the rich should. Right? If we're honest about how we interact with them at a personal level. Like if you meet someone who's well-dressed and drives a nice car or whatever, do you act with them the same way you act if someone looks completely impoverished? Dirty, torn clothes, no car, living in a car? I don't. Now, to be fair, it might be that you're acting in a more honest way with the person who's impoverished, and that might be better overall. But the fact is, there is a difference. And you might find yourself, as I do, as I drive down the street to my house, if I'm heading from Jake or Tyler's house back to my house, it means that I'm going down 19th, and then I head west on Caracas, because I live on Caracas. But if I take that direction, I pass 3 brand new houses on 19th. And you might be like me, and you might look at those houses and think, I'd rather have that house than mine. It's 3 times the size. And you might think about the people who live in the house and be like, man, what are they doing right? What are they doing right? And you might drive by a homeless person and think, what are they doing wrong? What choices did they make that got them there? Right? Or you might have a homeless person approach you and just be terrified. Or not want to talk to them at all. Or feel disdain or disgust. Or what was the other word we talked about in Sunday school, Brennan? There's some other good synonym for that. Disdain, disgust. Oh, I forget it. It was really aggressive. Anyway, you might feel those things towards people who are poor. You might look at God and say, no, you've got it wrong with this caring for the poor thing. You may listen to me say that God has a preferential option for the poor and think I'm wrong in saying that. But there are plenty of examples from Old Testament stories, from the words of the prophets, from the way the psalmists wrote their songs, from the law books, that make this abundantly clear. But perhaps our greatest example is in Jesus himself. In Jesus, we see the presence of God, one, localized in one who was poor, the son of day laborers. It's an interesting question to ask, right? A useful thought process to ask, All things being equal, let's keep all the same stories of the miracles, the stories of the parables, the stories of the crucifixion, right? All that. Well, you wouldn't have the crucifixion, but that's neither here nor there. Let's keep everything the same. Why couldn't Jesus have been born to a royal family? Or to an influential family? To Jairus' family, leader of the synagogue? And that's just local. Why not leader of the temple? Why wasn't he born to the high priest? Why wasn't he himself high priest? You might be quick to answer, well, there's nothing so impressive about a high-born person attaining influence. Exactly. That's kind of the point, right? In Jesus, we come face to face with one who forces us to ask hard questions. And so what do we do in the face of that? We want to domesticate Jesus. We want to turn Jesus into someone who reinforces what we already know. But the kind of Jesus we see today is the Jesus who gives preferential option to the poor, to the outsider, to the downtrodden. We hear a story today of Jesus heading to the house of the synagogue leader Jairus because his daughter is sick. And he comes to Jesus and says, please, I've heard you can heal my daughter. And Jesus says, let's go. Yeah, great, perfect. And they're going through this big crowd of people, and all of a sudden, a woman, it says who, has no money because she spent it all on physicians who could not help her. Perhaps these are bad face actors. Perhaps they are people who sold some sort of promised medication that they knew full well didn't do anything. Perhaps she even resorted to going outside of her own country, paying travel expenses, going to the Gentiles, maybe people who could do more magical efforts or something like that. Whatever the reason, we are told she has no money and still has the health problems. And she forces herself through the crowd. She takes all of this agency upon herself, says she is full of faith. She trusts. She trusts that whatever is around her situation cannot be the be-all, end-all of the universe, but knows there is some ultimate beyond all of it, and she reaches out and she touches Jesus, and Jesus' power, agency, effectiveness, right, flows out of him and heals her. And Jesus doesn't just keep walking, does he? Oh, someone must have gotten healed. I felt power go out of me. What does that feel like, right? I've always loved this story. Like that, like a jolt. So he's like, no, wait, we have to stop. Now, if you're Jairus, what's going through your mind at this point? What do you mean stop? We can't stop. My daughter's sick. She's going to die. You promised that you would come and help me and heal her. And Jesus says, wait. I have to meet this person who had this faith. This woman, not a synagogue leader, not in any way wealthy, in fact, impoverished. I have to meet with her. I have to talk to her. You can wait, Jairus. I know you're not used to waiting, Jairus. I know people wait on you, Jairus. But today you're waiting. Jesus is the one who sees all of the suffering that this woman undergoes. He sees it even more because of her unimportant place in society and says, this woman's burden is the one I need to address right now. Now, Jairus' daughter was still healed, of course. We heard the story. Jesus doesn't just disregard the needs of that family, but he stops for this unnamed woman because she had a burden that needed to be lifted. It reminds me of those couple of verses in Matthew 11. Come to me, all of you who are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. American Christianity tends to spiritualize this, for lack of a better word, right? Like, are you emotionally weary? Are you carrying burdens in your heart, right? The Message translation is kind of the epitome of taking this direction. It says, are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me. Nora Jones, come away with me. And you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. The burned out on religion part is interesting to me, right? Very much targeting those who perhaps have light physical burdens, perhaps. But the word weary, are you weary, is often translated labor. That's the way the King James translates it. And I think that's a better word because the word is to work yourself to the bone, right? To work to the point of exhaustion. Weary, like I've worked all day, right? Think roofing or trench digging or something like that. So what if we read this like historically? I love the way the Message translates the Bible, expanding it, right? Making it into like plain language, getting us to like think metaphorically with these images. But what if we took it in another direction? Have you worked yourself to nearly death on Herod's new palace for little pay? You know, the one in which he entertains Roman officials who have cared nothing for you while they all grow richer? Have you walked under the burden of a mile's journey under the weight of a Roman soldier's pack while he mocks you in your barbarian ways? Come to me. I would never put a burden like that on you. I would never make you labor like that. That gives it a different meaning, right, than burnout on religion. A different flavor. Does Jesus speak to that situation as well? Of course he does. Does Jesus speak to our angst, the things we carry with us from being like born in this late stage capitalist era? Of course. But we do have to be honest that we're not poor, at least not the most poor. We may not be the winners, right? We still have to work to eat, work to get our shelter, work to live. We don't accrue our wealth exclusively from the labors of others. But we're also not the biggest losers, right? We're not the most disenfranchised. We're not the most impoverished. Most of that is not even done where we can even see it. And this is where our text from 2 Corinthians comes in to begin to shape us, to give us a path to walk. As we ask where it is in this disrupted, disjointed world we have a place. Where is it that we can stand? What gap can we fill in with our very presence and being? In the call of 2 Corinthians, Paul speaks to a church who was not struggling due to a lack of wealth. And Paul confronts them with the need of a community who is experiencing harsh impoverishment, the community at Jerusalem. And Paul wants the Corinthian people to give of their wealth, to give money to Jerusalem, in case you have a bulletin where you need to answer a question. For us who need to be reminded of God's preferential option, the words to the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians may give us a way to do that. For those of us who may forget that there are those who are significantly worse off than we are, or that there are worse places to live than we live, this text can give us both a posture of valuation, shaping the way we approach and think and pray, and a call to action that are ours to adopt. Paul's second letter to the Corinthians shows Paul's attempt to try to get the church of Corinth back on track. He addresses various concerns, but they all appear to lead him to this particular text in chapter 8, where he follows up with them regarding their previously promised financial contribution to the church at Jerusalem. Because the church at Jerusalem had fallen on hard times. If you remember from the beginning of the book of Acts, the church of Jerusalem had initially been very intentional to structure itself in a way that those who were poor would be provided for. They sold their land, their homes, they pooled the money, and then they gave to each other, each according to their needs. I once heard a preacher comment on this, and she said that, maybe the Jerusalem hadn't done the right thing in selling everything all at one time. Look where it got them. That couldn't make less sense, and it completely misses the point, because Jerusalem was under persecution from King Herod at this time, and there was a severe famine. And we all know the history of oppressed peoples, even in our own world right now. Famine plus blockades means people die. It doesn't matter how you approach it as a community. Jerusalem's answer to poverty was 100% the correct answer. It just lacked the power that comes from people. And so now Paul is traveling all over the world, what? To make that network bigger, connecting all these different places back to the city of Jerusalem. He's got a group of Jewish folk in the outer region of the empire Do you think they're really going to make a dent in Rome's system of wealth distribution? Obviously not, right? Just like you or I wouldn't. But can Jews and Gentiles working together? Can rich or poor coming together? Can slave or free standing side by side do something? Well, Paul thought so, at least. And so he's working hard at making these connections. And this letter shows us his work firsthand. He wants to show to a significantly Gentile population that their physical and spiritual well-being is tied up with that of their Jewish brothers and sisters in Jerusalem. What Paul is working to build here is solidarity. Notice in the text, there's no sense of charitable giving. Right? Hey, you know what? The Church of Jerusalem could really use it, and they would be so grateful to you if you could just step in and save the day. No, it does not say that. The text says, this is a matter of fair balance. The word behind fair balance can also be translated equity. In Paul's mind, it's just simply unacceptable that some should have an abundance while some have a lack. It's just part of his Jewish theological thinking. It's part of being shaped by thousands of years of scriptures that say that that's wicked and wrong. In Paul's mind, it doesn't even need to be defended, right? He just says it's a matter of fair balance, so that some who have little may not have too little, and those who have much may not have too much. That's a quote from the Old Testament. He just moves on. If Paul were alive and had to write a letter to the American church, this would probably be one of the sections where there's a theological unpacking, right? Because he knows he'd have more work to do with us on this issue. But he says regarding this idea of balance that the abundance of the Corinthian church it exists, right, because of the need of the Jerusalem church. So that the abundance of the Jerusalem church may become that which addresses the needs of the Corinthians. Isn't that beautiful? That's the world the Apostle Paul is trying to build. Again, according to him, because God is saying to. Maybe he's wrong. Right now, when you give to them when they need, Paul says, since you're able to, at some point, someday, they'll be able to give to you when you need it. And he's not clear that it's financial. It's indicated, but perhaps it's something else. Perhaps it's leadership. Perhaps it's fellowship. Perhaps it's whatever it is, right? He says they can exist for you as well. The only thing that can weather these storms of famine, of plague, of evil rulers is a broad connection of communities who, out of love for one another, take care of each other. Paul says that our salvation lies with these connections. First, we are freed from the power of the love of money and its hold over us. As we learn to see that it is only temporarily ours. It's not even ours, right? He says your abundance exists for Jerusalem. The only reason you have abundance is because you can fill in the gaps for those who don't. This is so long because I've just been going on. I have not been reading it as much as I normally do. I'm sorry about that. It's almost done, okay? Whatever we have exists for someone else's need. If we think otherwise, if we cling to our abundance, our surplus, as that which proves God's favor or gives us a sense of security, right, or something like that, then we start to leave behind God's kingdom. We start to leave behind the way of Christ. Trusting God means trusting the faith-produced connections that we have formed with each other. And so the more people there are who consider themselves related to each other in this way, the more it serves to provide those shelters, provide those conditions of care, and to undermine the structures of power that create those conditions in the first place. Rome was big. Rome was mighty. Rome was the world, right? They didn't even know anything else. But the work of these little communities who related to each other in love made a serious, lasting material change. To the point that when finally Rome fell, they blamed the Christians. We're not too dissimilar from the Corinthians, right? We live in a part of the world that benefits from empire. We spent the last few days in Orlando. It's just like It's fun. It's amazing. There's stuff everywhere. There's all kinds of things to do. Everything's big and fancy and nice, right? And that's just Orlando. That's not even like Vegas or Dubai or something, right? But we benefit from so much of this accrual of wealth, right? So it's easy for us to forget that our primary concern of relating to others is one of solidarity. Instead of engaging around social debates of standing or who's better than whom or whatever else the Corinthians squabbled over that we do too. Can't be distracted by that stuff. We also have to realize that we're not too dissimilar to the Corinthian people, because they have a beautiful hope that they could make a real difference in the world, although they're a small community. We too may feel too small to do anything. And we are. But our hope is that when we position ourselves alongside others who also feel too small to see hope, we find life. We find Christ. We say with Paul, we are the body of Christ. For us, then, this means ensuring that we're taking steps towards living in direct relation to other people, specifically those who suffer the most. Not because we're better, something like that, right? We're seeking, remember what Paul says, fair balance, not charity. That means we first have to listen. The Corinthian church may not have even known about Jerusalem's struggles. They didn't have the internet. They didn't have, Instagram, whatever. They had no way of knowing that the church of Jerusalem was struggling financially. Paul had to tell them. Paul had to inform them. So who is that Paul for us? There are all kinds of people working to do those kinds of connections. There are folks in the CBF connecting churches with means to churches in need. Hope organizers, Caitlin, Jasmine, and the new one I haven't met yet, setting up listening meetings so that the struggles of communities may be made known to everyone and then shouldered by all as we build power for solutions. Right, those are just two right before us that we have already. We have to listen to the people who are making those connections and showing us who maybe don't have the same needs, the needs that exist. Also, then, secondly, we can just go outside, because we are surrounded by need with our own firsthand experience, right? There are parts of our city or our county that obviously are in need. You can just cross the street and the buildings suddenly are like dilapidated, right? We know there's need around us. So it's about not sheltering ourselves from it, but listening to it, seeing it, embracing it honestly, with all that it means. What does it mean to let the mind of Christ be in ours? It means that we give preferential option. It means we let the woman with the blood flow stop us in our tracks. It means that when we're out helping someone who asked us because they were a little more important than us, we tell them, wait a second, I got to talk to this person. It means we go specifically where there's giant crowds of people, which I hate, I really do, but that's the only place you meet people, right? That's where Jesus goes. We can find the kind of life that Jesus demonstrates, and we can build the kind of networks that Paul envisioned. We really can. We have the tools to do it. We just have to utilize it so that we do not fall into that trap of that imbalance, that damning imbalance, as Paul would say, that has plagued us for far too long. So this is our call, the same call to the Corinthian people. Consider your siblings in need. Stand with them as immensely valuable people who share with us as we share with them. So that each, Paul says, can give according to their ability. Why? So that each may have according to their need. To create reciprocal relationships that free us and save us from having to give ourselves over to lesser gods. May we commit this way, to live this way together. May we continue to be open-minded and hearted, not letting those gaps close up, not being sure of ourselves, but listening for for the solutions that present themselves as we approach the faith-filled cries of the others in our world. Let's pray. God, help us to be honest. Help us to be honest. Help us to stand before Christ as those who have to deal with Christ. Help us to hear all the stories of the disciples as our stories, unsure